September 1944. Eastern France wasn't quiet anymore. The American advance was rolling forward like a steel tide, chilling through exhausted German units that had been retreating for weeks. Villages fell, road junctions were secured, supply lines stretched eastward toward Germany itself. But one obstacle refused to move. On a rocky rise overlooking a key supply road sat an old stone fortress. Thick walls built centuries earlier, narrow approaches covered by machine guns, artillery dug in behind reinforced stone, underground chambers that laughed at small caliber fire. It wasn't modern, but it was deadly in the right hands. Inside were roughly 1,500 German troops, infantry, artillery crews, stragglers from shattered units who had regrouped behind those walls. And leading them was a German major who had decided this would be his line in the sand. No retreat, no surrender. To him, the fortress wasn't just a position, it was a symbol, a chance to prove German discipline still meant something while everything else collapsed around them. American reconnaissance didn't miss it. That fortress sat on a critical road junction. Leaving it alone wasn't an option. Supply convoys would be exposed. Ambushes would bleed men and fuel the longer the place stayed active. General George S. Patton reviewed the reports. Maps spread across the table. Gun positions marked in red. Elevation lines traced in pencil. He didn't rush. Patton never rushed decisions. He rushed execution. First came the offer. Standard procedure, efficient, humane, smart. A junior officer approached the fortress under a white flag and delivered the message. Surrender now. Your men will be treated as prisoners of war. Geneva Convention rules. No unnecessary bloodshed. Inside the fortress, the German major didn't even pause. According to witnesses, he barely let the officer finish speaking. He straightened his uniform, looked down from the walls, and answered with theatrical certainty. "Tell General Patton," he said, "that if he wants this fortress, he'll have to kill me to get it." The words were meant to echo, to sound defiant, heroic, to boost morale inside the walls and maybe make the Americans hesitate. The officer returned with the message. Patton listened, didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, didn't smile either. He simply said, "I can arrange that." That was it. No dramatic pause, no speech, just acceptance. And in that moment, the fate of the fortress was sealed. Patton wasn't insulted, he wasn't impressed. To him, the German major hadn't issued a challenge, he'd submitted a request. And Patton was very good at fulfilling requests using overwhelming force. Orders went out immediately. First, full encirclement, not partial, total. No roads in or out, no reinforcements, no supplies. Second, bring up every heavy artillery piece within range, register targets, measure distances, prepare to fire with precision, not rage. Third, call in air support, not random bombing, surgical strikes, command posts, ammo storage, artillery emplacements. And finally, loudspeakers. Patton wanted the Germans to know what was coming, not as a threat, as a schedule. That night, inside the fortress, German soldiers lay awake listening to engines, distant gun movements, and calm American voices echoing through the darkness, explaining exactly how the next day would unfold. Some men whispered doubts, some prayed, some believed the walls would hold. Their commander told them this was honor. Outside, Patton looked at his watch. Morning was coming, and with it, consequences. Darkness wrapped around the fortress like a warning. No stars, no moon, just the low hum of engines, the clank of metal, and the distant thud of American artillery crews setting up in the hills. Inside the stone walls, sleep was impossible. The German soldiers knew something was wrong, not because shots were being fired, but because nothing was. Patton wasn't attacking, he was waiting, and waiting in war is often worse than fighting. Then the loudspeakers came on, not shouting, not threatening, calm, measured, professional. The voice spoke in clear German. At first light, American artillery will begin targeting the outer walls. 2 hours later, airstrikes will commence. After that, ground forces will assault through the breaches. Any soldier who wishes to live may surrender at any time. No insults, no propaganda, just facts. Inside the fortress, tension cracked open. Some men believed it was a bluff, others didn't. They'd already seen what American firepower could do to towns and columns caught in the open. A fortress wasn't invincible, not anymore. Junior officers argued quietly. Veterans shook their heads. Young soldiers stared at the stone walls and wondered if history was about to bury them alive. The major wasn't interested in debate. He walked the battlements, pistol on his hip, reminding everyone of duty, of honor, of sacrifice. He told them Patton was testing their nerve, that if they held, the Americans would move on. But the loudspeakers didn't lie. Outside the walls, Patton's plan locked into place. Artillery units finished registering their guns. Every shell had a purpose, no wasted fire, no random destruction. He wanted the fortress taken apart, piece by piece, like a machine being dismantled. Air support checked in. P-47s loaded with bombs waited for dawn. Tank crews rolled forward to point-blank positions they'd use later, engines idling low. And Patton made one thing clear to his commanders. "This isn't a siege," he said. "This is a lesson." He didn't want days of fighting. He wanted hours. He wanted the Germans to understand that defiance didn't slow him down. It accelerated the violence. As the night dragged on, small cracks turned into fractures. A group of German soldiers approached their lieutenant, asking permission to surrender at first light. He refused. Another officer quietly ordered his men to be ready to run if the walls collapsed. Some men loaded extra ammunition, others hid personal photos in their pockets, just in case. The major stayed in his command bunker, confident, stubborn, convinced history would remember him as the man who stood his ground against Patton. Dawn approached. Outside the fortress, American gunners took their final measurements. Inside, German soldiers held their breath. At exactly the scheduled minute, the first artillery shell screamed through the air, and the fortress learned the difference between courage and reality. The first shell hit exactly where Patton said it would. Not somewhere near the wall, not a warning shot, right on target. The explosion ripped chunks of stone out of the fortress, like teeth knocked from a jaw. Dust and smoke rolled over the battlements as the ground shook beneath the defenders' boots. Then another shell, then another. American artillery didn't fire fast, it fired precise. Each round walked its way across the same sections of wall, hitting weak points over and over until centuries-old stone finally started to fail. Inside the fortress, men were thrown off their feet, lights went out, radios crackled and died, dust filled lungs. The walls that were supposed to protect them were turning into weapons, shards of stone slicing through rooms like shrapnel. German artillery tried to answer. They got off a few shots. Then American counter-battery fire locked in. Every time a German gun fired, American observers tracked the flash. Minutes later, shells slammed directly into those positions. Crews were buried alive, guns twisted and flipped like toys. The message was instant and brutal. Fire back, die faster. 2 hours into the bombardment, the fortress no longer looked unbreakable. Entire sections of wall were cracked open. Defensive firing positions were gone. The illusion of safety was bleeding away with every impact.
And then the aircraft arrived. P-47 Thunderbolts roared overhead, low and fast, not carpet bombing, targeted strikes. One bomb through a roof, another into a courtyard, a third straight into what used to be the Major's command post. The explosion blew the bunker apart. Maps burned, radios shattered, officers died under concrete and steel. That's when the first white flags appeared. A few at first, then more. Small groups of German soldiers stumbled out through breaches in the walls, hands raised, faces gray with dust and shock. American troops waved them forward, disarmed them, moved them to the rear. The loudspeakers kept talking. You can still live. This is your last chance. Inside the fortress, the Major snapped. He ordered soldiers back to their positions, threatened court-martials that no longer mattered. He had deserters shot as examples, but instead of restoring discipline, it shattered what little morale remained. The men weren't inspired, they were terrified. By mid-morning, the fortress was a wreck. Smoke poured from shattered chambers. Ammo cooked off in secondary explosions. Defensive lines no longer existed, just pockets of confused resistance. Patton watched through binoculars. He didn't smile. He didn't rush. He waited until the fortress was broken enough that the assault would be fast. Then he gave the final order: send them in. And that's when the real end began. Moment the order came down, everything moved fast.
American infantry didn't charge screaming. They moved quiet, tight formations, weapons up, eyes locked forward. Engineers went first. They ran toward the broken sections of wall, ducking through smoke and drifting dust. Explosions had already done half the job. Now wire cutters snapped, debris got cleared, and paths opened where walls used to stand. No dramatic music, just boots on rubble and the low crack of distant gunfire. Inside the fortress, it was hell. Smoke filled hallways, fires burned unchecked. The stone corridors amplified every sound, footsteps echoed like ghosts. German soldiers hid in corners, behind half-collapsed rooms, clutching rifles with shaking hands. Some fought. They fired blind through smoke, bullets sparking off stone. Americans answered clean and controlled. One burst, one target, move forward. Others didn't fight at all. Hands went up the second they saw silhouettes moving through the haze. Helmets dropped, rifles clattered to the floor. These men were done. They just wanted to walk out alive. But deep inside the fortress, the Major refused to surrender. His command bunker was cracked, half buried, but still standing. He stood there, uniform torn, face streaked with dust and blood that wasn't all his. The radio was dead. His officers were dead. The fortress was dead. But his pride wasn't. He gathered what was left, maybe 30 men, some wounded, some barely holding it together. He told them surrender was betrayal, that history would remember cowards. No one answered. Then the Americans breached the inner corridor. Flashbangs detonated, light and sound ripping through the dark. Shouts echoed, boots thundered closer. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Gunfire, smoke, silence. The Major was found behind an overturned table, pistol in hand, staring at the entrance. He didn't fire. He didn't speak. An American officer looked at him and said one sentence: "It's over." The Major dropped the pistol. Outside, white flags were everywhere now. Entire sections of the fortress emptied as prisoners poured out, thousands of them. Medics treated wounded on both sides. Engineers secured ammo dumps. Radios crackled back to life with one simple report: fortress neutralized. Patton arrived in person hours later. He walked through the ruins slowly, stepping over broken stone that had stood for hundreds of years. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He turned to his officers and said, "Remember this, walls don't win wars, speed does." And with that, the army moved on, leaving behind a fortress that learned the hard way that the old rules were dead. By sunset, the fortress was quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. Thousands of German soldiers sat in long lines outside the shattered walls, helmets off, weapons stacked neatly like they belonged to another life. Some stared at the ground. Some stared at the ruins, trying to understand how something that felt unbreakable had collapsed in a single day. No one talked about heroism anymore. American MPs moved down the rows, counting prisoners. 1,000, then more again. The number kept climbing until it became embarrassing. For Germany, this wasn't just a defeat, it was humiliation. Word traveled fast. Field reports flew up the chain, from battalion to division to army group. Each report said the same thing in slightly different words. Fortress destroyed faster than expected. Enemy artillery overwhelming. Morale collapsed. Commander surrendered. At German headquarters, officers read the reports in silence. This fortress was supposed to slow Patton, delay him, bleed him. Instead, it barely slowed his breakfast. And that's what scared them. Patton didn't pause. He didn't wait for parades or headlines. Before the smoke even cleared, his tanks were already rolling east. Supply trucks followed. Infantry moved with them. The war didn't stop just because one stronghold fell. That was the real lesson. War wasn't about holding ground anymore. It was about momentum. German units nearby started pulling back without orders. Some abandoned defensive positions they'd spent weeks preparing. Others sent urgent messages asking for reinforcements that didn't exist. The myth was broken. The idea that old stone walls, thick concrete, and tradition could stop modern war was officially dead. American soldiers walked through nearby towns, locals watching in disbelief. They had been told the fortress would protect them, that the Americans would never get past it. They were wrong. One captured German sergeant said it best during interrogation. He wasn't angry, he wasn't scared, he was just tired. "We didn't lose to your guns," he said. "We lost to how fast you moved." That sentence spread faster than any official report. Patton read the after-action summary that night. He skimmed it, nodded once, and tossed it aside. To him, it was already old news. Another road, another objective, another enemy about to learn the same lesson. The fortress was history now. But the fear it created? That traveled with Patton, all the way toward Germany itself. The reports reached German headquarters late at night. No dramatic language, no excuses, just cold numbers and short sentences. A fortress, lost, thousands captured, minimal delay. Senior officers read the pages again and again, hoping they'd missed something. They hadn't. The problem wasn't the loss itself. Germany had lost ground before. The problem was how it happened. Fortresses were supposed to buy time, time to regroup, time to counterattack, time to breathe. This one bought almost nothing, and Patton was already moving again. Orders were rushed out, defensive lines were adjusted, maps were redrawn in a hurry. Units were told to hold at all costs, which everyone knew meant until the Americans showed up. Then the rumors started. Some said Patton never slept. Others claimed he ordered artillery strikes just to test morale. A few swore he attacked positions simply because someone told them they were impossible to take. None of it mattered if it was true. Fear doesn't need facts. German soldiers heard one name more than any other over the radio. Not Eisenhower, not Bradley, Patton. American columns didn't hide their movement. Tanks roared down open roads. Dust clouds rose for miles. They wanted to be seen. They wanted German scouts to report exactly where they were. It was pressure without firing a shot. Some German units pulled back the moment they confirmed Patton's direction. Others dug in deeper, hoping to avoid attention. Either way, Patton controlled their decisions. That was psychological warfare. Patton encouraged it. He He made sure captured officers were treated well, and then quietly released some of them. He let stories spread. He let exaggerations grow wild. Speed plus reputation was a weapon. One German colonel later admitted that by this point, their planning meetings had changed. They no longer asked, "Can we hold this position?" They asked, "How long until Patton gets here?" That shift was deadly, because once an army starts thinking about when it will lose instead of if, the battle is already half over. Patton understood this better than anyone. He wasn't just breaking lines, he was breaking confidence. And somewhere ahead, another defensive position was being prepared. Another commander believed his ground was strong enough. He had no idea the same fear was already on the way. By early morning, Patton's columns were already on the move again. Not random, not chaotic, everything was timed like a metronome. Every tank, every truck, every infantry squad moved with purpose, as if the battlefield itself obeyed orders. Soldiers noticed it immediately. The Americans who fought under him didn't just follow orders, they felt a rhythm, a relentless pulse, momentum. It changed everything. Wherever Patton went, retreating units crumbled faster. Once feared fortresses fell like dominoes. Entire battalions surrendered without a fight. Word of the fortress collapse traveled faster than troops could march. In the German ranks, rumors became reality. Officers whispered about Patton's ghost moving faster than maps could keep up. Morale eroded before shots were fired. Even the fanatical troops who had sworn to fight to the death began reconsidering. One young German lieutenant inspecting a breached position muttered to his men, "We're already lost. He's coming."
That was Patton's genius. He didn't just attack positions, he controlled perception. His legend grew with every step, not through propaganda, not through speeches, but through relentless, calculated, visible action. American soldiers fed off it. Confidence surged. They saw the chaos Patton imposed on the enemy and believed in their own inevitability. Every checkpoint taken, every surrendered garrison reinforced that belief. And somewhere behind them, entire German divisions began to make the same calculations: fight and die, or give up and survive. Patton's answer was always clear: if you resist, I will remove you efficiently. If you comply, you live. By the end of the day, another 100 kilometers were secured, another 2,000 prisoners counted, another story that would haunt German officers for the rest of the campaign. He was more than a general. He was a storm, one that consumed fear, hesitation, and pride, leaving only his unstoppable momentum in its wake. And the soldiers who witnessed it would tell stories for decades of an army moving like a living weapon, led by a man who turned strategy into spectacle and spectacle into psychological dominance. By the end of September 1944, the battlefield itself seemed to bear Patton's signature, not because he was the loudest or most theatrical, but because every move he made reshaped reality. Commanders studied him, soldiers feared him, enemies whispered his name like it carried a curse. And yet, Patton's victories weren't luck. They weren't chance encounters or mere brute force. They were calculated chaos. Every fortress reduced to rubble, every garrison captured, every enemy surrender negotiated or forced, all part of a rhythm Patton alone orchestrated. He taught a lesson that echoes beyond war. Leadership isn't about avoiding risk, it's about controlling it with precision. The German major at that doomed fortress,